Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to the NPalm Podcast, a new one-on-one show where I sit down with the folks behind some of our favorite games, or maybe the games that are just around the corner. I'm Alex James Kane, author of the Boss Fight Books entry on Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I've written for places like Polygon, who published my oral history of Morrowind in 2019, for Killscreen, Rolling Stone, and Glixel, Variety, StarWars.com, USA Today, PC Gamer, and Fangoria Magazine. I thought this podcast might be a perfect way to catch up with some of the people I've talked to in years past, meet some very cool new ones, and learn more about the art and craft of making video games. My guest today is Mike Gallo, who is the LucasArts producer on Knights of the Old Republic. Mike's a guy who's worked at a number of places across the industry: Konami, LucasArts, Kabam, on games like The Simpsons and Mission Impossible for DOS in 1991, Batman the Animated Series for the Game Boy, Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill, then Star Wars Episode 1 The Phantom Menace in 1999, Star Wars Demolition, Obi-Wan on the original Xbox, KOTOR in 2003, KOTOR 2 a year later, Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, the short-lived Star Wars Uprising, and Guardians of the Galaxy The Telltale series. He's also a great Destiny 2 player who's carried my ass to the lighthouse 3 or 4 times, and he's a lot of fun to talk to. If you happen to read my book on the making of KOTOR a few years back, he was one of the most prominent voices in that. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. Here's me talking to Mike again. But yeah, so I pulled you up on Moby Games again because I hadn't really, when we talked, it was mostly KOTOR for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
So, like, you worked on Mission Impossible, like the DOS game.
Yeah, way back, dude. Yeah, way back. I barely remember that game, to be honest.
That was QA.
Yeah, so Konami, back in the day, that was actually my second job in games, and I was hired as a beta tester. And at the time, it was because Konami US had signed all these publishing deals for PC games. So that was, Windows. Back in the day, it was, 286 and 386 machines were the things that we tested stuff on. But Windows, Commodore 64, Amiga, Atari ST, like all of that kind of mid to late 80s hardware. So there was just a ton of projects, and Mission Impossible was one of those things. So that's definitely a deep cut.
Yeah. So I saw something about customer support for TurboGrafx 16. Was that kind of like your sort of halfway step into the door of the industry, that job, or?
I mean, that was the step. So that was the very first, video game industry related job I had. And it was because NEC had their US headquarters, I believe, was in Wooddale, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. And that was where they did all their customer support work, all that good stuff. And it's one of those moments that I look back on because it was luck and timing. I was outside having a catch with a buddy of mine. I was 17 years old. He still lived at home, all this stuff. And a friend of mine from down the street, was driving by. I was like, hey, what's going on? And we chatted for a few minutes. I'm like, where are you off to? He's like, oh, I'm going to work. I work as a customer support guy at NEC on video game stuff. I'm like, really? Because we used that, growing up together, we played video games whenever it was bad weather. We couldn't go outside. Video games, like, it was always part of our agenda. And I'm like, dude, bring me an application.
Yeah.
And 6 hours later or whatever, when he came back, he stopped by and dropped off the application, and I gave it to him. I filled it out and walked over to his house later that night, and then had an interview there, and then the rest is history. I started on the midday shift, which they desperately needed people for, and that was it. And it was customer support it was like the Nintendo hotline, but for TurboGrafx. So it was game help more than customer service.
I mean, you had kind of that idealized 80s, right? Like, so you're what? You're like 15 when like the Nintendo comes out, the NES, right? Something like that.
Oh, no, no, no. It was 85. So I was 13 or 14 when
13.
it
Yeah,
came out.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about like the Mario game, like the sequels probably is where I was getting
Yeah.
that number from. Um, but you mentioned once before like that Death Star board game. You remember that story? Like, so
Oh,
that was that like the first game you ever got as a kid, or
yeah. I think because it was that period where Star Wars came out, it blew up in 77, but there were no toys. And I guess it was Kenner at the time, had the rights to do all of this stuff. So they did like they published all the puzzles and things like that, and that Death Star board game was one of the very first like pieces of Star Wars merchandise I remember getting, and it was I don't know how good of a game it was. I couldn't tell you. I don't
yeah,
remember at all,
yeah.
but that was the first thing. And it was they just had to crank out something to capitalize on it as quickly as they could before they had toys ready.
Nice. So I mean, what games do you remember playing with your friends? Was it NES stuff like Mario
Mm.
3 and
Yeah, we were all, just kids. So the only money we made was from like mowing lawns and odd jobs here and there. So we had to, we kind of like it was me and my buddy and his brother. So it was the three of us kind of pooled our money together, and we bought an NES with the Robbie robot thing, the gyroscope set, and then a couple games. And like we kind of would trade it every couple weeks. We would trade it over to one other's house. So, we would play together all the time, but in the early mornings and late evenings, whoever had it for that week got to play a ton of games and stuff. So that was kind of a strange thing because um Commodore, I think my first game system, Pong, the Sears Telesystem or whatever, Pong. But then the next game system I got was a ColecoVision, which I lobbied for a long time because I never had an Atari 2600 or anything. So I lobbied for the ColecoVision, had that, and played. I think I owned 10 or 11 games for that in its entire life and just played them to death. And then the NES thing kind of pooling our money together. But I also had a Commodore 64 at the time, which is what got me through some of those. The time between the ColecoVision and the NES thing was the Commodore 64.
so you're an Illinois guy, I'm an Illinois guy, but you're up from by Chicago, like Schaumburg, something like that, right? So
Yeah, grew up in Schaumburg, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. Sometimes featured very prominently in Onion articles about the suburbs of Chicago and just how it's basically strip mall after strip mall, which
yeah.
was very much my experience there. But it was good because Chicago was a one time a very central hub for a lot of the coin-op game makers. So like a lot of the manufacturers, if they didn't have like a full-blown office there, had a lot of shipping and receiving that was done there because Chicago is such a central location for the rail yards and stuff, and shipping out giant pinball machines and all of that made sense from Chicago. But Konami, Taito, Data East, Gottlieb, obviously Bally, Midway, like a lot of those well-known game companies had offices in Chicago, and NEC was out there. And they used to do tons of. They used to be much bigger in consumer electronics, and then went into the video game side, mostly fueled from Japan. And then Konami had a headquarters out there, and that kind of led into the next from going from NEC to Konami, was again just another thing of like, the marketing team at NEC. I had a lot of good back and forth with them because they looked at me as, there was a few guys on that middle day shift that they would always come to like evaluate games and take a look at stuff that they were working on and give them feedback. We were kind of their own little mini focus group, right? So they would often spend a lot of time just talking to us about stuff. And one of those guys went to Konami, and he's like, "Hey, we need a tester here. You'd be great. Come over here and do this." And that's kind of how I made my jump from NEC to Konami. I was thinking about this last night, thinking about like, those times back at NEC, and there's a few moments where I think about some games that we were evaluating and looking at. One of them was Bomberman, and Bomberman on the TurboGrafx was the first one, I think. And no one, like the marketing team, really didn't get it because it was just so simple. It was, a single screen and all this stuff. And it was like, yeah, but it was multiplayer. And that was one of the things that the TurboGrafx, it was a weird thing that you had to have a multi-tap to play with more than one player in the TurboGrafx. But when you had the multi-tap, you could play with 5 players. And Bomberman supported it. And it was one of the few games. There were a few games like Dungeon Explorer and Bomberman where the two ones I remember from launch time period that supported like 5 players. But they were a hoot. It was a hoot to play those games with 5 people, and playing Bomberman with 5 players was great. And we were another good friend of mine was trying to push the marketing team. They're like, this should be the game that we use to sell the multi-tap. Like, bundle it with the multi-tap. It's a party game, play with your friends. And I don't know if there was ever anything that was done around Bomberman and the multi-tap, but it was kind of a match made in heaven. And I think it was really because of that 12-4 shift at NEC, all of us playing that game and just having a great time is what kind of made them bring over Bomberman. I don't know if they were going to bring it over to the US. So I like to think we had a little part in that and making that happen. So
yeah, I remember it coming out on the 64, and like I had never heard of it at that stage, but then it was just something to grab at Family Video and try, and this N64 one was so much fun.
Oh yeah, good. It was good stuff. That was a good time, a simpler time. There are still 2 or 3 people from that TurboGrafx team that I still chat with occasionally.
Still kind of in the games and tech orbit, or are they doing other stuff?
2 of those guys are still more game centric, and one guy has been working as a designer on many games because again, Chicago still has maybe not as much as it used to, but it still has a game development community. So there's still some developers out there, and he's been working out there doing that ever since. Another guy that was worked for Tiger Electronics, which had its headquarters out there as well. And they did all those little LCD handheld things and stuff like that. So
nice. And your parents, like, are they excited when you start to, you're like, I'm going to go into video games and be a tester? Is that, were they thrilled about this, or were they kind of like very working class, like pragmatic people, or how'd that go?
Well, it was kind of mixed. And I don't think my dad really understood what it was I was doing, because he just looked at it as playing games.
Right.
So there was, early on, I would, and being a young kid and liking games anyway, I would bring work home all the time. I'd bring home a Super Nintendo, or bring home my work computer, and sometimes I was just doing it to play some stuff that I wanted to play that I couldn't get to otherwise. But most of the time, I mean, I would bring home early burns of Contra and Contra 3 and Castlevania 4 and stuff like that, and hook it up to my better TV at home and, test it and, write down bugs and stuff like that while I was at home. But I was really just doing it to enjoy it and explore. And, all of those dev builds had, level selects and, you could play the music and sound effects without going into levels and stuff like that. So a lot of cool little things like that. And, at the time, even though I knew they were dev tools, it was still cool to me. It was still so new to me that it was like, oh, this is so cool to be able to like just pick a level and go play it or see the stuff that's in development, because there was tons of parts of the game that weren't finished and you could mess around and play with it and break things. And it was just a lot of fun. My dad really didn't get it until I told them that I was going to move to California to continue working. And I think it was that moment where it clicked of like, oh, this is a job / career. This is actually something that he can do. And my dad was, it's, one of the first times where I think he was, cause he was old school. It was hard to make him happy and proud and all that stuff. And, it was one of those things. I drove from Chicago to California and he insisted on driving with me. So, we got to spend 3 or 4 days driving across the plains to get to California. Yeah. And it was good. It was a good time. Yeah.
Did you work uncredited on Symphony of the Night? Is that right?
I think I'm actually credited in that. I think that was one of the few. So let's talk about Symphony of the Night. Symphony of the Night is a good. There's an interesting story there, and it's one of those games that I look back on as it's great. I was super happy that people loved that game as much as we did internally. It was very strange because when we used to get packages. Like, it was so great to get the package from Japan would come in, and it would always go to one of the guys in the office who he was a Japanese employee that was from the Konami office in Japan, but he was the point of contact for all of the builds and everything that we would get. And like, Monday morning or sometimes whenever we'd get the package, or he'd come over into I sat in this huge test pit because I had, 30 different machines hooked up to monitors. So I had like one of the biggest cubicles in the entire building. And he would come over and be like, "Oh, what's in the package today?" And he gave me he's like, "This is the new Castlevania game." I'm like, "Okay," and this was PlayStation 1. So I'm like, "This is gonna be great," fire it up, and soon after, like a couple of the marketing guys like heard that we had the new Castlevania game. So they were like standing over my shoulder and fired up, and it's like 2D. And they were like, they like were disgusted and just left because it was PlayStation 1. So everything was 3D. That was what everyone wanted. And I was like, well, all right, cool. It looks awesome. The animation's great. Let's, keep digging into this. And I think the first day I sat there and messed around with that build until like 10 o'clock at night. Yeah. And, I'd written down a bunch of things and took a bunch of notes and some bugs and stuff like that. And then the next day, the timelines here may be fuzzy because this is almost 30 years ago. But the next day, I remember I'm like, guys, you gotta see this. So there was a couple of bosses in that game that used some 3D stuff. And there was just a few things like that, but I'm like, look at the map. I'm like, this is the map. I hadn't yet gotten to the point in my playthrough or discovery of it where, we got the castle to flip upside down. Hadn't gotten to that point yet. So after the first day or so, just like, look at all that, like, it's huge. This is this is awesome. Like, so far, this is great. The music that I've heard so far is amazing. Like, all of this stuff, and just trying to, kind of selling them. And they were like, oh, okay, all right. Well, let us know. And then, later on, eventually, I'm like, what the heck just happened? I can't even remember in my mind what the transition was in the game to get to that upside down world, or if I found it through like a level select or something in the build to do that. And I just was like, the map is upside down. Wait, what? And then, you see your percentage going past 100%. I'm like, this thing is like double the size. And, I brought him back in and like, look at this. So it was another one of the, I feel like, I was thinking about like the Bomberman story earlier, and then this Castlevania story of like really selling the internal folks on this game. Because again, it was almost one of those things that was like instantly dismissed because it wasn't 3D. And had to go through this like, hey guys, like, this is really cool. You should check this out. And, eventually they were totally on board because they saw all the stuff that was in that game and how big it was. And it was Castlevania. It was one of our, Konami's main IPs. I think at the time it was Contra and Castlevania and, Turtles, of course, but this was one of the original IPs. So they got behind it and blew it out for launch. The one thing that I can 100% say I contributed to in Castlevania was, I was like, the note to the team in Japan was, can you please add a music select? A lot of games, at the time, they'd have a music select somewhere on one of the menus or in the settings where you could just play the tracks on the disc and just, play the music. And they came back and said, yes, but we're going to put it in the library. So the US version has that music selection in the library, which wasn't in, maybe they put it in the Japanese release as well, but I don't think it was. I think that was added for the US release. That's the one thing I can say I contributed to, besides, some bugs here and there, but that was my one contribution that was added into the Castlevania.
That's awesome. Yeah, imagine like at that point, most games had kind of like been experimenting with 3D at the time, and then you have this one that's sort of an evolution of like the Super Nintendo game, basically.
Yeah.
But now it's sort of remembered as like, if you're going to play a Castlevania game, Symphony of the Night is often the one that people recommend, or if not the original,
Yeah, I mean, I love that game is included in the same breath, as Metroidvania, right? Like, as that kind of subgenre of games, because it was so much fun to play through that thing.
You also worked on Metal Gear Solid and Silent Hill, two little-known cult classics. How did those go?
Metal Gear Solid, man, oh man! Again, this is now California. Konami. So so I'm in California, and same type of deal. One of the guys comes over. He's like, "Hey, I have a Metal Gear build," and again, it was one of those very early things. Not a lot of the story was in there at the time, or that you could find, but it was just like playing through. It was the original demo. If you remember the original demo, that was one of the bits that we had kind of the demo disc in development version, and then kind of the full dev version of the game. And it was another one of those things, that demo is what, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. We played through it a dozen times just to check out every single thing we could, every single menu and interaction that we could have in that thing. We went through it, like, again, it was like kind of all night. Me and another colleague sat there and played it just for hours. Throughout the development of that thing, I got a chance to go to we would travel to Japan maybe once a year for folks on my level. Like they would have folks go out to talk about the upcoming lineup of games and things like that. And on that one of those trips, we got to go to KCAJ and met with Kojima and talked to the team, and just got to see what they were working on in the studio. I got to see there's this. I'm pretty sure this is a famous story or a public story about like how they used Lego to kind of set up some of the mission. They did some of their mission design and prototypes in Lego, just to get an idea of the 3D space. And of course, Kojima is a huge Lego fanatic anyway, but got to see some of that stuff and see some of the. I remember when I was there, a few of the guys were working on the end sequence of Metal Gear with the Jeep escape, and seeing that kind of in a very early, rough development stage. The main purpose of that discussion, I think, was Kojima really wanted to make sure that we got some great talent for the VO. So we had a couple of, I wasn't super involved in it other than just trying to help coordinate things. But we had one of the guys at the Japanese office was a native English speaker that spoke great Japanese, but he was part of the translation team translating the stuff from Japanese to English for Metal Gear and trying to hold all of that stuff that was part of the story and that was the key vision of Kojima, but then make sure that the things worked right for the English audience. And he had a huge part in making Metal Gear what it was, I think, in that process. And then those, like him, and I'm not sure if there was many other folks, they were involved in getting all of the talent for the US VO work, getting the studio in LA and getting all of that stuff lined up. And, hiring the at the time, hiring the casting director, and I'm blanking on her name, but she is a legendary voice director in LA. She's done Hanna-Barbera cartoons and video game work, but she was who we hired. And I remember I got to go to the studio for a couple days, and I just remember sitting there because I was really just there to observe and let everybody else do their work. And it was the first time I'd ever seen this environment. And we had video of all of the cutscenes in the game. So they were doing VO against the cutscenes in the studio. And then of course, just the massive script that they had, but just seeing the voice director and seeing her work through this stuff was awesome. Like it was I'd never experienced anything like it before. It was just like, holy cow, this is amazing. Again, I'm still in a stage in my career where I'm geeking out about some of this stuff because it's just so cool to see this thing happen. That first time you do anything new like that is just, I mean, I do still take this stuff in as, it's a bit of wonder and magic, and just seeing it come together was awesome. And, I mean, David Hayter was the original voice of Solid Snake for many of the games. They also did all that work as non-union. And as the previews and stuff started hitting, I think a few of them realized how huge it was going to be. And I will never forget the day. It's like, I gotta believe it's, the summer of the year that Metal Gear came out. And my phone rings at the office, and it's David Hayter. And I was like, "Oh, hey, how's things going on?" And he starts just talking to me. He goes, "Hey, I want to ask that. I know the contract we signed and everything we did was that we were going to have, pseudonyms, but he's like, I want my name in the game. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll send. I think we actually had email at that point, so I'm like, let me send an email. Let me communicate to the team and tell them. I'm like, I'm sure that they can accommodate that. No promises, but I'll look into it. And sent an email, and I think they were super happy to do it. So I think he's the only one of the voice cast that his real name is in the game, at least initially. Did you also know that the first pressings of Metal Gear are kind of, I want to say it was still like 500,000 of them went out like this, but there was a legal issue that needed to be addressed in that game. So they had to, all it was the end screen of the game that gave you all your stats for the game. It was set over a gun like on a table. And the gun, you could clearly see the manufacturer markings on the gun.
Yeah.
So they had to just go in and Photoshop them out. And then, I mean, it was still, I think it was virtually the same screen, but just with the gun manufacturer name scratched out.
Nice. So those are probably collector's editions that people don't realize, or if they still are floating out there.
I'm pretty sure that you could tell. I'm sure that the like serial number on the disc or whatever has a revision number on it, so you could probably tell that way. But yeah. I think it's safe to talk about this stuff now. It's 25 years old, right?
If we know about it, then the people who are serious like game collectors definitely know about this, I would imagine.
I bet you they do.
I clicked over to IMDb, and I think the person you were talking about is Chris Zimmerman.
Oh, so yep, it is.
She worked on the Smurfs, Paddington Bear, the Bill and Ted cartoon, Scooby-Doo, Yogi Bear, like all that stuff that like from our childhoods, and Tom and Jerry. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so Chris Zimmerman, and I've gotten to work with two of the best voice directors in the game, Chris Zimmerman and then Dara O'Farrell from LucasArts. Like, he is one of those names that if you've been around games for a little bit, you probably know his name.
Yeah, when I was writing the book, I basically tried really hard to fact check. I think that Dara is credited on more Star Wars video games than any human being outside of George Lucas. And I don't even think it's close. I think Hayden Blackman is like behind him with like 50, and then Dara is like, 250.
Yeah. Obviously, because anything that went through LucasArts for that period of time that he was there, which was 20 years or something, he worked on it. The voice and audio department, my goodness, so many great folks that came out of that have gone on to do amazing things.
So didn't you very briefly work with a team? I want to say like Big Ape. Was that you?
Yeah.
And then before you went to Lucas?
So that story is at Konami. We were trying to get a relationship with LucasArts, because LucasArts, all of the games that LucasArts made, whether it was completely internal or some of the things they worked with Sculptured Software on, they had other publishers. So like JVC was one of the publishers for some of their NES games and their Super NES games. And Konami was trying to get this relationship with them. And basically they I think that LucasArts gave the good stuff to the folks that they had worked with previously. So the Star Wars games at the time. But they let Konami, we signed a deal with them to get Zombies, Ate My Neighbors, and Metal Warriors. And Zombies, they were both pretty good games on the Super Nintendo, and then Zombies was on both Sega and Super Nintendo. And Zombies was like a huge blowout. They did tons of marketing against it. They did all this stuff, and I think it just fell flat, and the game did not sell well at all. They way overestimated how much they needed to manufacture, and it was one of those, it was the point in the industry that was really hard because it was all physical goods and it was chip based. So the lead times on the manufacturing for that stuff at the time, like it was TurboGrafx was way worse. It was like 6 months at TurboGrafx, I think, but it was still 3 months from the time the stuff got manufactured and got put on a boat and shipped over. And the pre-order culture wasn't there yet at that time. So that's a metric that a lot of places, it's probably much harder now, but there was a time where that pre-order metric was used to, like, how many do we need to order? How much do we have to manufacture? And they would build a lot of their models off that. I'm sure that data still factors in somewhat, but it's probably not the same. We ordered huge orders for Zombies. And I remember when it all came in, it was like because the office I worked in was also the warehouse and main shipping office. Rows upon rows of pallets stacked with, I think I want to say like each pallet, held X number of cases. And because it was like 500,000 units for each platform, and just rows upon rows stacked 3 or 4 high in the warehouse. And then nobody bought it and nobody wanted it, and it got discounted. That game was down to $5, I think, within just a couple of months. And maybe that time frame is off, but man, it was deeply discounted.
Yeah.
But the team that worked, they were all LucasArts folks. It was can I name names?
Yeah.
Mike Ebert and Dean Sharp, they were the project leads basically on Zombies and then on Metal Warriors. And I was the one that worked with them because I was pretty much the only one there that was their point of contact. So, I'd help, them go through whatever legal stuff they needed to go through and, do the submissions and all of that stuff for them and Konami. And when we had moved out to California, it was another one of those things where I got a call from, I think it was Mike Ebert called me up, and he's like, "Hey, we need someone to come help us on." This was after they had split off and formed Big 8. And like, "Hey, we need someone to come help us on secret game we're making." And it's like, oh, that secret game was Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. So it was the movie, the game adaptation of the movie. And since I was in California, it was a much easier sell because they didn't have to pay relocation costs and all that stuff. So I went and interviewed at LucasArts and got the job. So that was kind of like, again, it's another one of those connections, right? Like I went, that connection of my buddy that worked in NEC, and then I got a job there, and then there was, a marketing guy at NEC that really liked me, and I moved to Konami, and then I worked with some folks at Konami that liked me and liked the work I did, and was able to move to LucasArts to do that stuff. And that was a scary leap because, I had moved out to California and I had moved out there with Konami, but I was like, this is it. Like, this is the thing I've wanted to do. I want to go, like, LucasArts for me was kind of the holy grail of everything because it was all of my passions. It was video games, Star Wars, and then there was the movie side of it. I think the drive was like an hour from where I lived in traffic. And I remember getting home and I had a message on my answering machine at home offering me the job. And I nearly jumped through the ceiling.
These days, Lucasfilm Games is like this tiny little, I don't know how many people it is, but it's relatively this small little corner of like the Presidio office, I believe, kind of where like ILM's like businesses and things like that. But back then it was like its own huge office building that was LucasArts, and then they collaborated with ILM, but they're very separate, right?
Yeah, LucasArts was in a building, about 15 minutes down the road from Skywalker Ranch. And our building was mostly, I think we had 2 floors, and it was mostly LucasArts. So all of the production, it was everything. It was um, game production, game dev, um, legal, sales, marketing, everything was in that office. And then we also had Lucas Learning in that same space, and then THX was in our space as well. It was pretty much like the entire first floor was us, and then we had the downstairs area. And then we eventually took over this John Malkovich level of the building. We used to call it that because it was like a half floor. There was a special button on the elevator that was like floor 3.5. The back door of the elevator would open up, and there was like 4 stairs that went down. It was very strange.
So you get there and like, who's your sort of your manager, or who hired you? Like, who are you dealing with at the like early stage?
My first boss there was Kamala Martin, and she was the head of the production department. And there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was probably 8 or 10 of us that were internal production, so managing and working with the internal teams. External production for those groups that were working with any external devs that we had, which I was technically one of those. And then the localization team, we worked really closely with them because they were in our building, but we worked very closely with that group. And we kind of, I think we kind of sat near where the president was. So like, I remember the area where I sat, and like on one end of my boss kind of sat in the middle, and then I had the president president of LucasArts sitting, a few rows down, and then the head of the studio head sitting a few rows to the opposite side. So it was kind of surrounded. And I remember I was hired specifically to work on the PC version of the Phantom Menace game. But very shortly after I started, the person that was working on the PlayStation port there was some reason that she had to step away. I think, maternity leave or something. And she had to step away. So they're like, hey, can you manage? Boy, this is some dirty laundry story here. So they're like, hey, can you take over the PlayStation port? Here you go. See you later. And like, I'm like, what did I just get into? So it was one of those things where back in the day, LucasArts was huge on PC. All the TIE Fighter games, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, all that, all that stuff. Sorry, I should say all the X-Wing games, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, like Monkey Island, like all that. PC was the bread and butter. I now, years on, it didn't hit me right then, but years on, I'd realized that what had happened was this was right when pre-order stuff was starting. So pre-orders were a thing at this point, basically. And the sales team was like, we have over 1 million pre-orders of the PlayStation version. So the console version was outpacing PC, the PC counterpart. So they basically realized that they didn't know where the PlayStation port was. So they needed someone to dig in and find out what the hell was going on with it, because it was poised to be one of the biggest releases that they've ever had. So I'm like, well, I know the Big Ape team isn't working on it. Who's working on it? And it's like, oh, Nick. I'm like, Nick? I'm like, there's one guy? There's one guy working on it? It's like, there's more than one guy, but go talk to Nick. I'm like, okay. So I go talk to Nick. Yeah, there was more than one guy. There were 2 guys, and they shared an office, and they were both engineers. And one guy was really kind of the lead PlayStation like architect to port over the PC code. The other guy was more on the rendering side and making sure that we could actually display what we needed to display in the game. So he was, crunching all those numbers. Well, the PC game was coming in super hot. So like they hadn't locked code yet. They hadn't really locked anything down yet. And this is like getting on March at this point of 99. So the game is supposed to come out in May. And PC, you could go up until the last minute because your manufacturing times were quick. You didn't have to go through approval process, right? Like you just went through your QA process and you could put it out. But so the first couple of days I worked on the PlayStation game, I went and told my boss, I go, hey, so here's my kind of top line assessment of this. And there's no way that this game is shipping in May. And they're like, well, it has to.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, we don't have a locked version of the game. The game barely can run on the PlayStation at the moment. We also have 2 guys. And I'm like, we need what other headcount do we have? And I'm like, you want me to do an assessment of what we need to do this? That's a different, that's a different discussion, but I don't even know what the headcount is because I'd only been, working on it. I'd only been working on it for a few hours. So we finally, it was so good after a couple of weeks, finally come up with a plan. But during that 2 weeks, so I've been at the company for 2 months. During that 2 weeks, I got fired 13 times or whatever, because every time the production head would see me in the hallways, he'd be like, hey, how's things going on that? It better ship in May. I'm like, well, you're fired. I'm like, and he was, it was joking, but it was really weird. Like, it was one of those moments of like, Jesus Christ, like, what am I going to do? I've only been here for, 2 months. What do you want? So we came up with a plan of attack, but there were so many problems with the way the levels were authored on PC. Porting them to PlayStation was a problem. So we basically had 3 of the main level designers from Big Ape. We set them up in the office near the engineers, gave them their own space and all that stuff. And they just came in and just cranked through, fixing all of the issues in the levels on Phantom Menace and making sure that there wasn't out of bounds problems in every single corner. Like, literally there was a point where, QA, like, you could if you jumped into any corner in the game, you could fall out of it within 2 or 3 seconds of jumping in the corner, being like, so like, it was just a very, it was very unstable in that respect, but it just needed that kind of, the support of the guys that built the levels for PC to come in and help us address all those issues and still make it performant as good as much as we could on PlayStation. So that team literally it was the port of the PC version, but it was 3 engineers and 3 or 4 level designers, like, did the bulk of the work to get that thing over to PlayStation. We had to go through and reset the launch date. So the PC version shipped with, the movie. I think it was like a week before the film came out was when the game shipped. And then that PlayStation version came out in September of that year, and still did well. But it was just one of those things where there was just shipping it in May was an impossibility.
It's funny how many games like tie into the Phantom Menace, because you had like Racer, which is probably the one that like sort of quote unquote did the best. It's certainly like, fondly remembered. And then you had like just all these like Jedi power battles and Battle for Naboo. And then you worked on Obi-Wan, which is one of my like all-time favorite Star Wars games from sort of the beginning of the Xbox era. Was that sort of your... So you did some time like writing manuals and stuff. I imagine that was sort of your little break from producing, or how does that feel?
It was just one of those things that I mean, look, I don't want to take credit for writing them because we had writers there. I did like I think I might have a manual writing credit on like Rogue Squadron 3 or something like that. And maybe a couple other ones as well, but it was... the manuals would get distributed for review by everybody, but there were so many people that were always so busy, trying to do all of the other stuff, that to really do a thorough job going through the manuals, you needed to spend some time and effort. And I think, there were moments where I had that time to do that and spend the extra time to make sure I would go through the manuals and, edit them as best I could and rewrite certain parts that, didn't make sense. And I would spend a lot of time working with our internal manual writer and sit down with her and like go through and sit with her at her Mac and, make the changes with her, or just watch her make the changes and make sure that we were like, the wording was correct and everything else. Because, at the time, I mean, that was the manuals are still a huge part of it back then, right? Like you still had to have a really good manual that shipped with the game. And like, I remember KOTOR, we had a spiral bound gigantic manual that shipped with that thing. And, it was not an insignificant part of the job at the time, was making sure that that stuff was as accurate as it could be. And I think a lot of production minded folks are like this, is just what do we have to do to help ship it? I mean, I'm sure there were other people that, stepped in and helped do some other things with the audio teams or with the manuals and stuff like that. It was one of those things that I enjoyed doing and trying to get it as good as I could, because it was also part of what I did at Konami. So I was kind of used to doing it. That was where, I would take all the manual screenshots and make sure that the screenshots made sense for what was being described in the manual. And I try to always put like hidden clues in some of those screenshots sometimes too, like hey, here's where you save your game and you can name the save game. And I would usually try to make some dorky save game name there and stuff like that. I think the first credit that Sergeant Angry got was in Star Wars Obi-Wan. Actually, I put Sergeant Angry as an alias in the special thanks of Obi-Wan.
So that was, you started using that nickname in what, multiplayer stuff or arcade games? Or
I started using it in Counter-Strike. LucasArts had obviously there's a ton of folks there that played games. We would play Counter-Strike or Quake after work every night. Like every night there would be a group of 30 to 60 people that would be jumping in and playing games. We had one of our engineers like set up he got an older PC that he set up to be our server for Counter-Strike. So we had our own internal servers and stuff like that. And we would play Counter-Strike for hours after work was done. But Sergeant Angry started then. Sergeant Angry started because of LucasArts, actually.
Nice.
I can tell you that story if you want to hear that.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean, the Sergeant Angry story was my old alias was BFM 66 is what I went by. I'm giving away so much. BFM 66 was my kind of multiplayer name, and I gave myself the Sergeant Angry nickname because I got in trouble. I got reported by some of the marketing team because I guess my feedback and my attitude was too abrasive at the time. I think a lot of it was just being young. But there was also part of it that was, I had a Chicago attitude in California, and my Chicago attitude was basically like, this is stupid. Why don't you fix that? And I didn't think that was a bad bit of feedback to give somebody, but other people did. So I basically got in trouble. I had to go talk to the president. The president was like, you come across as, pretty angry and abrasive sometimes. And we talked a little bit about the Chicago attitude and approach. And it was an interesting moment because I had to, moving to California is one of the best things I ever did for my career, but just for my view of the world, right? Just getting a different perspective from what I'd been in the Midwest and in Chicago. So it was great to get that feedback, but that was Sergeant Angry was born on that day in 1999. So
amazing. Yeah, there is kind of a stereotype about Chicago. I read like Bob Odenkirk's memoir, and, he talks about kind of a similar thing of just being like, I'm from Chicago. Of course, I'm like an angry asshole, like that kind of thing. And, yeah, it is kind of like Midwesterners are grumpy, and then Chicago city people have their own kind of flavor of I've talked to people in New York, and there's a similar kind of like cut the bullshit kind of attitude with people. And then you talk to Californians, and they're like, "Well, I just got done doing yoga, and I'm the happiest person you've ever met." And I'm like, damn, I gotta get out there on the West Coast. But you're in Austin, Texas now, right? Which is kind of like a miniature LA, would you say? Is that like an accurate stereotype that I have in my head, or no?
No, not at all. I mean, maybe some people might describe it that way, but from my perspective, there is a lot of cool things to do out here. It's not like LA or Chicago or New York.
Okay.
It's still, I feel like it still has a smaller town feel. Downtown, like the nightlife downtown literally is two or three of the main streets, and maybe like a 4 or 5 blocks on those streets where there's like, nightclubs and bars and great restaurants and that type of nightlife. So it's really small, like in that respect. Really small, but we still have awesome traffic out here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's always what you're going to make of it, right? Like Austin has a lot going for it. I still technically live in Austin. My address is Austin, but I'm 25 miles away from downtown.
Oh, okay.
So it honestly, it feels to me like where I grew up. It feels to me like Schaumburg. A lot of strip malls, a lot of, fast food joints and chain restaurants and stuff like that. But, a lot of cool things you can do out here. I've lived here for so many years. I want to go see the bats. Still haven't gone to see the bats on the South Congress Bridge, but that's on my list of stuff to do. But that's only like in the fall. Every time I think about it, it's like not the time of year to go do it.
So, I talked to you for like 2 hours about Knights of the Old Republic 1, so we don't have to kind of go over that time again necessarily. But like with KOTOR 2, that must have been kind of insane, right? Because it's like, okay, we're giving this tech to Obsidian. You guys have till like Christmas of 2004 to hammer out a game, and you must have been running on fumes after the previous year, right?
Yeah, I mean, so when there is a week of my life that happened. It was after KOTOR 1 launched. I flew back down from Edmonton because I was up there just as we were trying to get the last builds together for Microsoft. Flew back down from Edmonton, went to work the next day. I went to the office, and then I flew out to San Diego for Comic-Con because I was going to be working at the booth at Comic-Con, manning the KOTOR station, because we were going to have KOTOR on display there and a bunch of other things. I don't even remember what other games we had at the time, but I think Galaxies was there as well. So it's like we had a pretty big presence and a decent sized booth, and it's a mini E3 situation, but you're dealing with the public and with fans and stuff like that. So I crunched to finish the game, got on a flight, came home, and then went right into working a trade show for 4 days or whatever, which was brutal. And then I took the next week off, and I don't remember. I seriously do not remember anything I did that week. And I know that it's like, oh, that was 20 years ago. Why would you remember? I'm like, I didn't remember what I did a week after that week. Like it was just sleeping and decompressing. Like I was just trying to get out of that intense mode of finaling a game. And then there's, I'm just going to say, it's just there's the postpartum after that. There's a little bit of like, what is my purpose now? What am I going to do? Because we didn't know yet how people were going to receive the game, if people were going to like it. Maybe at that point we were just starting to get like a good sense of it, and the reviews had come in and all that, but it was still nervous, right? Because, I want to whenever I work on something, I want it to be something that the people are going to love the people making it love making it, and that it does well for the company. You want it to do well so that you can keep doing that, right? It was always my kind of go-to thing. I love the game I'm working on. I want the people that are going to buy it to love it and the general public to love it. And, that means that the reviews will probably be good, but then hopefully it also does well for the company. Like, anyway, so there was still a little, like it was coming down from all of that, man. It's, you've been through it too. It is probably the same feeling, writing a book. And I think it's any creative endeavor that you've got, when you finally get to that point where you put it out in the world and let it go and it's no longer just yours, you just go, I hope you like it. I got a phone call during that time off. This is the only thing I remember about this week off. I got a phone call and said, hey, it was the president saying, hey, I think we're going to sign a deal to do KOTOR 2 with Obsidian. And can you go down there and meet with them? So that was crazy. I honestly think that was maybe 2 weeks or so after Comic-Con that we went down, me and Justin Lambros. We went down to visit with the team at Obsidian, Fergus and Chris and Darren and Chris. There were 3 Chris's. And sat down and met with them, and they had just broken away from Black Isle Interplay and were getting things set up, and they were ready to take it on. It was and that was the beginning of a lot of crazy times. They had a really good relationship with BioWare and with Greg and Ray, so they were able to work together pretty early on, just kind of understanding the ins and outs of the good stuff and the bad stuff with building KOTOR, and then identified some things that we wanted to do for KOTOR 2 in terms of tech. One of the biggest thing is like we want to make better Jedi robes, like
with the hood and everything.
It was incredibly difficult. Like it was incredibly difficult to make sure that we could do it and still fit within memory, because at that time it wasn't cloth tech. That was not a possibility in what we were building. So we originally were scheduled. The original plan was to ship the game in February of 2005. And this was right about the time things were changing pretty dramatically at LucasArts. Big shift in company direction and a big shift in the leadership in the company. And we had gone to E3 of 2004, sorry. And it was like, hey, here's KOTOR 2, and here's all the stuff we're doing that's new, and it's a new story. And by the way, we're shipping in February. We basically set our ship date at that show. And then like 3 weeks later, we changed it. And we didn't move it back. We moved it up. So we moved the ship date from February of 2005 to December 2004. And at the time it was probably seen as a really stressful thing for everybody. But the other thing that it really forced us to do immediately was evaluate what we were trying to build. And I'm pretty certain that had we not done that, we would have probably tried to build something that was too ambitious and probably would have missed February. But who knows? Like we needed to go through that exercise. And I mean, there's a ton of stuff. I mean, all about the KOTOR 2 project. I can't remember what officially it's called, but just
the restored content mod.
The restored content mod. Like trying to bring back all of that stuff that was built, all of the stuff that was recorded for the VO that was recorded, entire storylines that were cut and trimmed. And we basically went through this. Maybe this is going to be like my villain arc, because I know that there's plenty of people, I've seen the comments about like, well, LucasArts did this to the game and they completely screwed it over, and it should have been this and it was that. And it's there was a number of reasons why it happened. But again, I mean, I think that I don't know. I think the game that we shipped certainly was not everything that people wanted it to be, just because we had so much of it that didn't you couldn't complete. Certain character arcs were just left hanging. And that was an unfortunate side effect of all of those cuts. But I mean, the Obsidian team did great work just to make that game in the time they did. They put together the QA team really loved going through that story multiple times. That was kind of my first litmus test of like, so what do you guys think of the game? Like, oh, we like it. Like the story's great and there's some great characters and some really cool stuff in here. And it didn't hit, I think, the same way that the first one did, but I think it's a pretty worthy sequel.
Yeah, I think when I was working on the book, but especially after the book came out, that I did, it was like I was sort of shocked to be reminded of how many people like KOTOR 2 is the apex of Star Wars games in a lot of people's eyes, including I think Sam Witwer, who plays like Darth Maul. And, a lot of characters that are voiced and does Palpatine a lot. He's like a huge KOTOR 2 fan, and I mean half the Star Wars gamers, quote unquote, they'll tell you KOTOR 2 is their favorite. It probably comes down to talking to Kreia and how good her dialogue is.
Yeah.
But also, like, there's customization that you guys... It seems like you were on sort of a tight leash for KOTOR 1, and, there was, like, arguing about, like, lightsaber colors and stuff that you've talked about before. In KOTOR 2, there's, like, all kinds of customization, and even in the DLC for, like... the first game that came out after release, like there's a little bit more, couple different lightsaber colors that get added and things like that. So it seems like the success of the first game probably contributed to a little bit more leeway in the second one. Does that sound right to you?
I'm sure that it kind of opened the door in a lot of ways, right? Like there were a lot of and we've talked about this before. There were a lot of discussions internally with Lucasfilm licensing and stuff like that. We knew that it was going to be a hard sell. This was an Old Republic game. We were like, we're not set in this universe. We're set in an unexplored, mostly period of time. So that was kind of how we were able to get some of that lightsaber customization stuff in the first game, and then just kept pushing that forward in the second one. Yeah, I mean, now even Jedi Survivor has that stuff, has way better customization than we ever thought of then. But all the lightsaber colors and things you can do in Fallen Order and stuff like that too, like it's great to see that in the time frame of the current canon. The movie 1 through 9 now actually has some of those different lightsaber colors in there rather than just blue, red, and green.
Yeah, I wonder if the Marvel comics had something to do with that, because like the comics line that launched around 2015 has done like really well, and people really care about that stuff, and there's all kinds of random goofy lightsabers and stuff. So that's a lot of fun. I could see how maybe that helped get permission for some of the fun stuff we see in like Fallen Order, but I don't know. Do you recall like? It's sort of well documented now. There's like mock-up logos of Age of the Jedi, like for the the KOTOR 1 title. Do you recall, like, did KOTOR 2 have titles other than the Sith Lords that you can recall?
I 100% know that we did. Man, I'm trying to pull one out right now, and I just can't think of one of them. But yeah, we definitely had. I wouldn't be surprised if I actually have some of those marketing mock-ups somewhere. Probably have some stuff that I shouldn't have, so I can't talk about
it. What's so fun about that game is how it like leans into the horror stuff with like Darth Sion and like Nihilus being kind of just a vampire with sort of a skeletal spaceship, sort of. I appreciate that aspect of that game, and the Nihilus mask is kind of as iconic as Revan, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, again, there was a lot of really great work that was done on that game. And it probably doesn't get the same props that KOTOR 1 gets, but I think it deserves a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, the sequel hit Switch like probably 2 years after the book came out, and I had plenty of healthy distance between like the time of my life where all I thought about was KOTOR, and then just like, oh, the sequel's on the Switch, I'm gonna fire this up. And yeah, I definitely had that moment of like, is this better than the first game in like a lot of ways? And yeah, I think it comes down to, do you care about like the moment to moment lightsaber combat, slicing up droids? Do you care about dialogue? Do you care about being in a Star Wars movie? And I think if you care about being in a Star Wars movie, like the first game has a lot of more additional appeal that, it feels like Return of the Jedi or A New Hope. But the sequel is kind of like a great Star Wars novel. I don't know.
I mean, the other thing though, like they also think about this. They had to build an entire team from scratch and made the game and shipped it in a little over a year. Like it's like, even as I'm saying it, I'm like trying to check myself and be like, is that time frame right? Like, yeah, that time frame is right, actually. Like that is, yeah, it's kind of unheard of.
It's funny how like these days you would never hear like, okay, this new studio has been founded and their first project is Knights of the Old Republic 2 after the first game was like this record-shattering RPG on the Xbox. But it had that star power. It had that Black Isle Studios pedigree that, people just trusted. And I guess, LucasArts, was a bunch of Black Isle fans and BioWare fans. So I guess they, you guys all knew what you were getting with that studio, but it's funny. You would never see that in a press release today, I don't think. New studio, KOTOR 2,
Yeah, it was definitely a different time. It was a different time for sure.
And one of the big headlines that I've seen like in the last week or two is, how, Jedi Survivor was made in like this record breaking like 3-year production window. And, it's crazy that games used to get made in a year and be as good as KOTOR 2, like this all-time classic.
I want to say that we actually had more dialogue to record in KOTOR 2.
Oh, than the first?
Yeah, and honestly, we would have never been able to do KOTOR 2 in that time from all of that stuff. Like KOTOR 2 was the LucasArts team actually. We had a small internal group of people working on KOTOR 2, which we didn't have on KOTOR 1. So we did all the audio and VO and music production internally for KOTOR 2 as well as KOTOR 1. But then we also took on the cinematics for KOTOR 2 because it was one of when we went through that time period of like going through the scoping of everything, and because we pulled the date in a couple of months, so we identified that we're going to have to get some help here for the cinematics team, so that that burden's not on the art team at Obsidian. We did a lot of that stuff. There was it was a much bigger collaboration. Not to say we didn't collaborate with BioWare, but I think we had more LucasArts folks internally involved than we did on KOTOR 1. We had all the same people from KOTOR 1 plus an entire cinematics team.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, like ILM and LucasArts worked on like the Bounty Hunter cinematics, and I guess KOTOR 2 feels pretty similar to those in a weird way, in a way that the BioWare game, was more just sort of like the characters in engine with like the pretty music and stuff.
And we obviously had pre-rendered stuff in KOTOR 1. And then of course the one very key cutscene that we had to do in runtime because it was your character. So there was a lot, like, I love those types of challenges. It's always like, oh, this is a very, it's weird. Because if people outside of the games industry knew how long and how difficult it was to do some of that stuff, their minds would probably be blown, because I don't think that there's not necessarily an appreciation for just, oh, hey, we're going to decide. We didn't just decide to do that cutscene in engine because we wanted to. Like, there was so much time and effort and tech to make that work, and to make it work every time. Like, yeah, it's kind of crazy.
And then after KOTOR 2, there's a million other things happening as far as like the Clone Wars game and Battlefront, and a lot of games came out in that little window of time. You talked about the leadership shift. Obviously, a new president came in. That was when George was releasing the DVD box sets, which were huge. Battlefront 1. So new scenes getting added to the films effectively, and then all this hype machine to prepare for Revenge of the Sith. Was there like a sense that like games were becoming like more profitable? You know, these games are coming out and they're selling, you know, Grand Theft Auto numbers. Was that kind of the thinking that we need to make Battlefront and put it like a trailer on the DVD and capture that mainstream audience like GoldenEye did? Or
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my perspective on it. I'm not exactly sure how this jives with like what was really going on, but I think a lot of it was seen as a missed opportunity. And at a business level, you're looking at these things and going, it's Star Wars. Like, video games are huge. It's Star Wars. This is a great IP for video games. Why is this not bigger? Like, why are we okay with selling 1 million units of a game, which is a lot, but that was about the time that the budgets were starting to rise too. Some of the budgets on some of those games were not necessarily KOTOR, but I'm thinking of like Obi-Wan, the internally developed game, like, and some of that stuff. The budgets on those games were kind of crazy. And people looked at that, and it was, by today's standards, not crazy. Like, there are mobile games that cost multiples of what Obi-Wan or Knights of the Republic cost, right? But at the time, there was just like, you were starting to see these multi-million-dollar budgets. And then again, the Star Wars connection and the pedigree of all that stuff, like, it was seen as a missed opportunity. Like, why are we not selling? Why is our target not 10 million? Like that, like, why are we not trying to sell that? And because, the new president like had a marketing focused background and a great business sense, like, just was like, we need to make stuff that's gonna sell 10 million units, and it's gonna sell to this huge group of Star Wars fans, and not this smaller group that are really dedicated Star Wars fans and really want this story-driven, slow-paced RPG stuff. That was kind of the thinking around Battlefront. Like, and Battlefront 1 was really the first one of those. Battlefront 1, I'm pretty sure, broke every single sales record of LucasArts games. And then Battlefront 2 broke those.
It's not surprising, I guess, in retrospect, but
yeah, but then I think that then, like, the Star Wars game, it's kind of funny because like what was once record breaking and bonkers profitable, now the Star Wars games across all of the different studios, like, they want those games to be huge. Every single one of them has a right to be huge. Again, that opportunity of it being Star Wars and taking that IP and doing something great with it. Making games is hard, man. If you've been through it or are close to it, like in the way that you are, like, you get it. I think that a lot of people don't understand just how difficult it is, and the time it takes to solve some problems or make a decision about a certain thing. And a simple thing like, hey, we want to make our Jedi robes better in KOTOR 2. The effort that it took to do that. Wait, you guys took how long? I mean, I'm talking, it was months of work to make that work. And it wasn't months by the whole team, but there were several people involved in making that thing happen. games are so much more complicated in a lot of ways than they were then. And it's amazing to me to see new games that come out and see what they're doing and see how they handled certain technology and how they did certain things. I'll give you a recent example that kind of blew me away, Alex. There's a moment in the Destiny 2 Lightfall campaign where there's a montage, and after the first couple of cuts in the montage, I was like, oh, this is all in engine, because they're showing your character. That was when they first showed my character, I realized that it wasn't pre-rendered. I wasn't really paying close enough attention to be like, oh yeah, this is pre-rendered, because obviously it's pre-rendered, but it's in engine. And I mean, I think that cutscene in particular had some kind of mixed feelings amongst the community. But a few days or weeks after the campaign release, they put out a little mini blog and behind the scenes thing, and they specifically talked about that cutscene. And I really wish that they could have gone deeper into the making of all of the things that it took to make it, because it's a huge undertaking to do what they did.
Yeah. This is where Osiris is training you how to use Strand and not die, and so you repeatedly die, and it's very funny. It's like the comic relief section of the campaign, right? So,
and I mean, I think that there's certain things that are taken for granted. I think because people just want to be entertained, and they don't necessarily care how it happens, and therefore sometimes people may not completely understand what it takes to make it happen. I'll give one more Destiny example. I know I've talked about Destiny quite a bit, but the one of the other things that really is wonderful is being able to access your character while you're loading into another mission or PvP match. Think about how many games do that.
Not many.
No. And there are tons of technical trade-offs that I'm sure they had to manage for that. They had to make sure that their ability to, stream the animation of the ship flying and allow you to access your character stuff, while still threading in the loading of all the game data that they needed for the next thing you were going to see. Like, that's no small undertaking. And I never forget just how important it is to the flow of that game. Like, if you couldn't access your character while you were flying in, man, I mean, that would be annoying. And it's taken for granted. And it's a small thing that's taken for granted in Destiny, but it's just, they've got it nailed now. But that problem to solve, especially when they first had to solve it, that's no small feat.
Yeah, and now they've added like the loadout saves. All this stuff that, people have kind of been asking about. We sort of take things like the Destiny Item Manager app on your phone for granted, but for somebody who's just like on the PS4 in 2014 playing Destiny 1 or something, like, they wouldn't have known about any of that. Well, it didn't exist at that point, but, because it's like all these fan-made things have come from the open API or whatever you want to call it. So
it wasn't, I didn't know about Destiny Item Manager until Destiny 2.
Right.
And someone told me about that pretty early in my time in Destiny 2. I was like, what? Like, what? You're telling me I can do all this stuff without having to go to the tower?
Yeah, I got into using the app way late, and do it on my phone or the laptop, and you really take it for granted when that API goes down for maintenance or something. So, obviously at some point around The Force Unleashed or so, 08 or 09 in there, you left LucasArts and went on to do like The Sims and other things, and Sega, right? But is the timing on that right? Like 08?
No, it was 05. It was end of 05. Like, my very last day at LucasArts was like December 16th, I think, was my last day. And then December 19th, I started at Sega.
Nowadays, like, you'd probably take like a big vacation.
I wanted to get in there before the Christmas holiday, so Yeah, it's an interesting time. If I think back to that, I don't know if I would have made the same decision. I really loved my time at LucasArts. I look back on that time with 99% fondness. There's always things at the job that were difficult and rough, but I look back at that with a lot of fondness. A lot of people that I met during that time frame, I'm still very, very close with. A lot of great people. And seeing so many folks, so many people that have gone on to do amazing stuff since they left Lucas is just awesome. Oh, and some of them haven't left Lucas and are doing amazing things. Like, well, I mean, Leland, Koya Elliott is someone. She was one of our members of the audio team, and you will see her credits in many, many films because she's now like a sound supervising editor or whatever at Skywalker Sound, and she's probably been there for 20 years now. But I mean, I just remember, the brief time working together with her, like just how awesome she was. Dara, of course. David Wade Collins is another one, and
yeah, I was gonna bring him up.
He was in the audio department at Lucas, and I worked with him on a few projects there, and now he is just doing all kinds of things. A couple guys I worked with on Obi-Wan. One of the guys is one of the main guys behind the stagecraft work for ILM. I mean, he, art director, creative director, and then his kind of background and knowledge in games and software and technology. He's now part of ILM and doing amazing things there. Like, yeah, it's awesome. It's great. It's great to see everyone that's gone on to do some really amazing things.
And eventually you sort of found your way back once or twice. So with Star Wars Uprising, you went to Kabam, and then I remember you saying you had like a really good experience with like the boss there that you worked with. Yeah. And but how, I mean, that was a really interesting Wild West period where Disney buys Lucasfilm for like what 4 point some billion dollars, and there's all this like money, all this restructuring. LucasArts is like the sort of the ugly collateral damage of that, but then you get like a really amazing era of stuff popping up and them sort of experimenting with like the Rebels show, which is like awesome, and then this Uprising thing. So it's a mobile game with like its own original story and characters and like the most incredible art. How did that feel like going into it?
Yeah, I mean, I went to go work at Kabam after a stint with like an independent developer, and I kind of wanted to get back to San Francisco area and kind of get into the heart of the game development space again. And I'm like, mobile and Facebook games are blowing up. It would be great. Like I was really looking at it as from a career perspective, like it'd be great to get some of that experience. Like, let's go work on some of these, live games and all that. So that was one of the main things about going back into San Francisco and then into that space. And that Star Wars game, it's kind of funny. That Star Wars game came about after I was there for a couple of years, 2.5 years, something like that. And then started like, there was this internal push, and I kind of got consulted a couple times, and it was just a couple of meetings with a close buddy of mine that was like trying to lead this effort to try to pitch Lucas on getting the license to do a game. We had another project that had been built on that technology, and we wanted to reuse that for Star Wars. It seemed like a good fit for the type of game we wanted to make. So it was kind of magic how that all came together. It was a huge deal when we signed that internally to get the go ahead and sign the contract to make that game. It was pretty awesome, and it was pretty exciting because there was a lot of folks that had worked on Star Wars games of some type at some point that came in to start working on that thing. And then we put together a great team. It was a big team to make this little Star Wars RPG We did have cutscenes in the game with Princess Leia, and think I think maybe it was set around the time of Jedi. So that was really exciting. It was because it's a great little space to explore and try to tie in some events that happened in the films, and that was that was one of the big things. And the other thing was exploring the light and dark side a little bit more and going on your quests to get lightsabers and stuff like that.
So it was live for like 2 years.
Oh gosh, I don't even think it was that long.
Not even that long. Wow.
Let's see, it came out. We launched in the beta was I think September of 2015. 2015 is when Force Awakens came out, right?
Yeah, December.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we came out in September, I think, was the beta of that year. And we had a bunch of launches and content through Christmas and stuff like that. And then, I mean, the game basically got shut down July of 2016. Like, yeah, it was not a very long time.
I mean, that's the story with like a lot of what shall we say, like mobile live games that have come up in the last like, decade or so, unfortunately. But it sucks when it's something like so kind of ambitious and creatively interesting, right?
Yeah, we definitely did not ship everything we had planned. We had to really cut up a lot of what we wanted to ship at launch. There was a lot of cool little systems in that game too. We had kind of the meta games that I think we did a couple of events where we had that kind of stuff that took place where you'd go on to the planets to do missions, but then those would affect like the influence that the rebels or the Empire had in that quadrant or whatever. I can't remember. I think we just called them systems at that point. But like there was a lot of really cool little things there. A lot of cool story stuff. We had a lot of VO in that game too. Like it was kind of crazy. It was fully voiced in every language we shipped. So we shipped like French, German, Spanish, Italian, and then Russian, Turkish, simplified Chinese, Korean, all that stuff. So it was a pretty fun project to work on. The team itself was pretty great. We had a lot of really good folks on that team, and it was just, I think it's one of those things where if we would have had, I think we learned a lot, like, and we were really kind of just hitting our stride in terms of how we were building content, because you need to build content quickly, and it needs to be fun and stable and all of those things. So it was like we were really just understanding how to do that stuff the right way and get it out quicker. But we had already lost most of our players at that point, and it's really difficult to recover. Once like there's that kind of critical mass of the stuff that you launch with that people can chew through, but then those weekly, monthly, quarterly updates that come out, so that people start to, I understand, like, this is what I'm getting this week. This is the stuff I'm going to do this month. This is the stuff that's going to happen this season. And we just didn't have a good established content pipeline to get that stuff out yet. Like we were getting there, but again, that was stuff that it was just a shame that we didn't have all of those. It was difficult. The games are difficult. So, making sure we have all that stuff at launch was not possible because we had a very tight window we had to launch in. The biggest bummer about stuff like that is that now the only place that exists is in whatever YouTube content got published when the game was live. There's no other place that game exists. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's the YouTube content, and we did publish an art book. So I have a copy of the Star Wars Uprising art book somewhere with all of the art and the content and crazy things we made for that game. I'll have to find that because it's actually kind of interesting. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if some folks haven't scanned it and put it online.
Awesome, man. Well, Thanks so much for catching up. I mean, we talk all the time while we're playing Crucible or Iron Banner, but it's fun to kind of put some of this on the record and fill in the gaps of that story.
It's fun to look back. It's fun to look back. I'm glad that I can also look forward and have some fun stuff on the horizon.